Hey, welcome to Things Fall Apart, Day 1, Book 3 of 4, so you're making progress. A couple things about this book. Author Chinua Achebe wrote this book, I think, at least in part, as a reaction to Heart of Darkness. We saw his opinion and feelings on the book when you read that essay about Heart of Darkness when we read the last book. And I think this book responds to a number of the things that he brings up in that book. And so we'll just kind of be moving through this. And again, if you have questions, certainly let me know, and I'm happy to chat. And we'll chat on workday and chat as often as we need to. So if you want to open up your books and get your notes out, I would highly recommend jotting some things down. I included the questions we would have been discussing on day 1. I'm not going to necessarily go point by point through those, but I will be covering all of those. So we're going to talk through kind of the first 30 pages or so today, unless this lecture gets long, and then I'll break it up a little bit. So page 1 is about Okonkwo, right? Now he is the main character, and he is a flawed hero. He's got some very admirable qualities. He's strong, he's tough, he's very hardworking and determined, and he's also got some more negative qualities. He's not very compassionate, he's not very good at speaking, and he tends to resort to violence very, very quickly. In the beginning, it starts with some of his accomplishments. And so I would just kind of jot down information about Okonkwo these first couple pages. It talks about his winning the wrestling match, which was one of the things which brought him honor and made him well known. Okay, so on the bottom page 1, it said, or page 3, that was many years ago, 20 years or more, and during this time, Okonkwo's fame had grown like a brush fire in the Harmattan. So he got to be well known. And on page 4, we get a little more Okonkwo information. It said he had a slight stammer, and whenever he was angry and he could not get the words out quickly enough, he would use his fists. He had no patience with unsuccessful men. He had no patience with his father. Right? A lot of this book is how Okonkwo wants to reject everything his father is and be the exact opposite of that. Right? Now, some good Unoka, who is his father, here's some good information about him. This would be useful for an essay about this topic. In his day, he was lazy and improvident and was quite incapable of thinking about tomorrow. He always said that whenever he saw a dead man's mouth, he saw the folly of not eating what one had in one's lifetime. He wore a haggard and mournful look, except when he was drinking or playing the flute. On to page 5, Unoka loved a good fare and good fellowship, and he loved the season of the year and when the rains had stopped and the sun rose every morning with dazzling beauty. Unoka loved it all, and he loved the first kites that returned with the dry season and the children who sang songs to welcome them. And going down a little bit on page 5, that was years ago when he was young. Unoka, the grown-up, was a failure. He was poor, and his wife and children had barely enough to eat. So Okonkwo's father, Unoka, is compassionate. He's kind. I think he was a kind father. He was not violent. He was pretty lazy, and really the only times he was happy was when he was drinking and jamming on his flute like Jethro Tull. Now, Okonkwo was kind of the opposite of that. He would not be such a nice father, but he works really hard. He has very strict discipline. He expects a great deal from his children and wants nothing but the best for them. Going on to page 6 and 7, we get some more information about Unoka, and we get an example of how he lives. So on page 6, it said another good quote: Unoka was never happy when it came to wars. He was in fact a coward and could not bear the sight of blood, which is the exact opposite of his son, who loves blood and loves killing people and drinking out of his first skull, which we'll talk about later. Going on to page 7, we get some information about the culture. The first section or two of this book is a lot about Igbo culture. In Heart of Darkness, we get nothing of the culture of the people who live in Africa or various places in Africa, and here we get a great deal. Having spoken plainly so far, Okoye said the next half a dozen sentences in Proverbs. Among the Igbo, the art of the conversation is regarded very highly, and Proverbs are palm wine with which words are eaten. In Heart of Darkness, one of Achebe's complaints about it was that the people from Africa were not even given speech, right? There's a couple sections where they're said a couple things, like when Mr. Kurtz dies and the cannibals talk about eating somebody, but that's really about it. Now, in this culture, it talks about how important it is to be able to speak well and to be able to convey information. Proverbs are kind of like little morals or short story lessons, and teaching through Proverbs is a good way to do things, as teaching through stories is. And so, in this culture, which really values conversation and being able to speak well, one of Okonkwo's biggest downfalls is his inability to speak, right? And as it said on that first couple page, that he would quickly use his fists rather than talk things out. And we see this play out with his family a number of times. He resorts right to he resorts right to hitting folks as opposed to being able to talk about his feelings, because he associates talking with feelings and thus with his father. So his father liked to talk a lot, and so Okonkwo cannot talk at all. On to page 8, some more Okonkwo information. Fortunately, among these people, a man was judged according to his worth and not according to the worth of his father. Age was respected among his people, but achievement was revered. As the elders said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad who was sacrificed in the village of Umofia by the neighbors and avoided war and bloodshed. The ill-fated lad was called Ikamafuna. Now, even though Okonkwo was born to a father who was lazy and known throughout the village as weak and irresponsible, it doesn't matter, right? If Okonkwo is willing to work hard and rise up through the culture, he can do it, right? And he does. He overcomes a great deal of badness, right? Now, Ikamafuna is a character that we'll be talking about here in a second. He comes to live with Okonkwo. We get some examples of proverbs on page 9 and 10. So we talked about the palm wine with which words are eaten. So palm wine, right, is a liquor that is made from palm, and in terms of helping food go down, the palm wine with which words are eaten, or palm oil, it's something that helps the food go down, right? So you put ketchup on your hamburger so when you chew it and swallow it, it goes down easier, right? Conveying information in the form of a story, or in this instance, the form of a proverb, is a way to make the information go down easier and make it easier to understand. Um, Christianity and religious groups use ideas like this all the time, including proverbs. For example, we have an example of one of those on page 10. It's talking about moonlight and when it's a full moon in the village. As the Igbo say, quote, when the moon is shining, the cripple becomes hungry for a walk. Right now, this is just a little story, and it's a little bit of a joke that says it's so nice out when the moon is shining bright. Because if it's a nice full moon, and you've ever been somewhere in the wilderness anywhere, the moon's really bright, and you can see things really clearly, right? And so it's so nice that even people who are unable to walk want to get up and do so. Going on, then we get the story of how a neighboring village killed a young woman from Umofia, right? And so what they did is they sent a group of people to that village, and Okonkwo was one of the main people that went with them. Okonkwo was a great warrior. And it said, if the clan had disobeyed the oracle, they surely would have been beaten because they never would fight what the Evo called a fight of blame. Now, so what they're doing here is they're listening to the oracle, right? And if they had gone to war with this village, going against what the oracle said to do, they surely would have lost. Now, we see this with Okonkwo coming up a little bit later, like when he beats his wife during the Week of Peace. Okonkwo disobeys the oracle a couple times, and it always results in bad things. Page 13, we get some information on more information on Okonkwo and what he was like. Okonkwo ruled his household with a heavy hand. His wives, especially the youngest, lived in perpetual fear of his fiery temper, and so did his little children. Perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods and magic, the fear of the forest and the forces of nature, malevolent, red in tooth and claw. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. It was his fear of himself, lest he should be found to resemble his father. And so Okonkwo was ruled by one passion to hate everything that his father Unoka had loved. One of those things was gentleness, and another was idleness. He was so embarrassed of his father that he was determined to do everything the exact opposite of his father so as not to be like him. And so those things, Unoka likes to be gentle, he likes to be kind, he likes to jam on his flute, he likes to drink wine, he likes to celebrate, he likes to party, he likes to hang around and be lazy. And Okonkwo does not like any of those things. He feels deeply uncomfortable when he's forced to sit around and relax. And during festival time, he is really uncomfortable and kind of angry, and he wants just nothing more to get back to work. Now, so we see son rejecting father, with Okonkwo rejecting Unoka, and then we also see this playing out again with Nawoya, Okonkwo's son. Nawoya, I think, is more like Unoka, because Okonkwo is incapable of talking to him, he can't explain to him why he wants him to grow up differently, right? And so when Nawoya starts to act like his grandfather, rather than explain things to him, he beats him. Now, this results in a split between these two and bad relationship between father and son. Whereas if, as we talked about earlier, if Okonkwo was able to talk, which is one of the most important values in this culture, his son would have, I think, they would have gotten along a lot better and not ended up happening what ends up happening. Now going on page 17, 18, we get Unoka's death, right? Unoka was an ill-fated man. He had bad chi, or personal god, and evil fortune followed him to the grave, or rather to his death, for he had no grave. He was carried into the evil forest and left there to die. He died and rotted away above the earth and was not given a first or second burial. Such was Unoka's fate. When they carried him away, he took his flute. Okay, now, so because he had been disgraceful in his life, he was ill-fated, so they brought him and he died alone in the forest. Right? Now, in addition to Okonkwo not wanting to live his life the way his father did, he also does not want to die his way his father did. So starting at about page 21, we get Okonkwo's story of how he begins to redeem himself, and he goes to a dude in the village who has a lot of yams, and he asks him to donate some to him. So sharecropping is he would borrow these crops from these yams from this guy, and then he would sell them, right? And some of the money he would give back to the owner of the yams, and some he would get to keep. And this is a slow process of accumulating wealth, but for somebody like Okonkwo, who was not born with any, this is an important way to go about it. On page 22, it said sharecropping was a very slow way of building up a barn of one's own. And supporting his mother also meant supporting his father. She could not be expected to cook and eat while her father starved, and so at a very early age, when he was striving desperately to build a barn through sharecropping, Okonkwo was also fending for his father's house. So he goes and borrows yams from people. He works really, really hard to pay off the debts, and because he wants to support his mother, but his dad's still alive, right? So he has to support his father, and he's quite resentful of this, which makes him even more determined that he will not end up like his father, and his son Nwoya, Okonkwo's son Nwoya, will not end up like his grandfather. The year that Okonkwo got those yams, the 800 of them, the weather was terrible, right? And he had to work and struggle. And it said, since I survived that year, he always said, I shall survive anything. He put it down to his inflexible will. Now, we get a good quote from Unoka here that Okonkwo really tries to go against throughout the book. His father, Unoka, was then an ailing man and had said to him during that terrible harvest month, do not despair. I know you will not despair. You have a manly and a proud heart. A proud heart can survive general failure because a failure does not prick its pride. It is more difficult and more bitter when a man fails alone. Unoka was like that in his last days. His love of talk had grown with age and sickness. It tried Okonkwo's patience beyond words. Now, Greek mythology, we have an idea called hubris, right? And in Greek myths, characters are given their fate, and hubris or pride thinks that they can go around and circumvent their fate to get to a better fate. And usually what happens is they are brought closer to their fate. We get a prophecy from Unoka. He said it's bitter and it's the worst when someone fails alone, right? And Okonkwo, wanting to be great leader within his culture, we see what happens to him at the end. And no matter how hard he tries to achieve greatness and to differentiate himself from the other people in the community, he ends up dying and failing alone. So we will talk about that. One good paper you can write about this is comparing the structure of this book to that of a Greek tragedy. And if you've taken myth and legend or any courses like that, whether it's Oedipus Rex or various other works, we see, or the Odyssey, right? We see a character who is given a fate, and because they think they are smarter or more powerful, they try to rise above it, and then they are brought closer to it. Page 28, 29, we get some information about Okonkwo's son Nwoya. And it said, so Ikamafuna goes to live at their house. So Ikamafuna is the boy who was brought back from the village that had killed the girl from the Igbo, from Okonkwo's village. So the punishment for that, rather than go to war, they sent a young woman to live with the gentleman whose daughter had died, right? And then Ikamafuna is sent and he lives with Okonkwo. Okonkwo's son Nwoya was 2 years younger, became quite inseparable from Ikamafuna because he seemed to know everything. He could do all these things, and he can talk. That's the biggest thing. He explains things to younger Nwoya in a way that Okonkwo cannot. Even Okonkwo himself became very fond of the boy, inwardly, of course. Okonkwo never showed any emotion openly, unless it be the emotion of anger. To show affection was a sign of weakness, and the only thing worth demonstrating was strength. He therefore treated Ikamafuna as he treated everyone else, with a heavy hand, but there was no doubt he liked the boy, and indeed Ikamafuna came to call him father. Okay, now right around page 29 on to 30, we'll kind of stop here, but we'll pick up with this tomorrow. Okonkwo comes back, and it is the week of peace, and he went and tries to find one of his wives, and he can't not find her. Did she ask you to feed the children before she went to them? Yes, lied Nwoya's mother, trying to minimize thoughtfulness. Okonkwo knew that she was not speaking the truth. She walked back to his obi to wait for the return, and when she returned, he beat her heavily. In his anger, he'd forgotten that it was the week of peace. His first two wives ran out in great alarm, pleading with him that it was the sacred week. But Okonkwo was not the man to stop beating someone halfway through, not even for fear of a goddess. And we see what happens when people disobey the oracle and disobey the goddess. Then it brings ruin to everybody. Okay? So we will pick up with this tomorrow. Thank you for your attention.